Hey everybody, my name is Alex and this is Bento Radio. Now, before we get started, I have a huge announcement actually, and that announcement is if you are interested in the studio trigger of it all with our topic today, and you clicked on this video because you've always been interested in Studio Trigger and Studio Gainax and Evangelion and all that stuff, I encourage you to pop on over to bentobox.ghost.io. You can actually see it on the TV screen behind me. You should be able to see it, but there's also a link in the description of the YouTube channel. There's also a link, if you're listening to this, in the description of the podcast to the site, because I just published my interview from Anime NYC with Hiromi Wakabayashi and Hiroyuki Imaishi of Studio Trigger, which sprang out of Studio Gainax, and who are two of the three directors for New Panty and Stocking with Garter Belts. It's a short little interview, but I think it's worth your time, so definitely go check it out if you're all interested in what they have to say about coming back to that infamously legendary show after 15 years. She did the math in front of me in 15 years, but it's a great little interview, so be sure to go check that out. And now, without further ado, let's jump into what we're talking about right now. And that is a little show. Oh God, when is this from? From 1991. And it's actually not even a show. It's more accurately an OVA, or only video animation. Or VA is what I'm thinking of. Yep, only video animation. And that is a OVA from 1991. Called Otaku no Video. Now I'm going to toss it over to my assistant so she can give us a really succinct synopsis of the plot. Take it away,
Otaku no Video is a 1991 OVA by Gainax that mixes parody, autobiography, and mockumentary. The story follows Kubo, an ordinary young man whose life changes when he reunites with his old friend Tanaka, a devoted anime fan. Drawn into the world of anime, cosplay, and model kits, Kubo soon embraces life as an otaku, but he doesn't want to just be a fan. He wants to become the Otaking, ruler of all otaku. The narrative shows Kubo's rise as he builds an otaku empire that grows from fan clubs and merchandise into a global and eventually cosmic movement. It's exaggerated, comedic, and a thinly veiled reflection of Gainax's own rise in the industry. Between these story scenes, the OVA cuts to fake documentary interviews with different types of otaku, humorously exploring stereotypes while also celebrating their passion. In the end, Otaku no Video is both satire and love letter, showing how obsessive fandom can inspire imagination without limits.
Now that the plot is out of the way, I want to talk about being an anime fan and where it started in terms of acceptingness and where it is now, because they're two totally different worlds. Yes, you still get some people who will think it's weird to cartoons as an adult, but by and large, it's pretty accepted. And otaku, or even casual, it's never been easier right now to be a casual fan. And while it's easier to be a otaku because the fandom and the hobby is so much more accepted than it was. Even when I was a kid, it was a weird thing. And it was already starting to change by the time I was a kid, because Dragon Ball Z was around. And if you were into Dragon Ball Z, you were watching the cool cartoons with the cool kids. But anything beyond that, even something like Sailor Moon, unless you were a girl, you would get side eyes about, because people would be like, what is this? But this stuff's weird, yo. And also there were lots of misconceptions about cartoons, some rooted in truth, some rooted in not truth. But by and large, when I was a kid, it was a much less common thing to be really into anime than it is now. And lots of people just didn't watch anime. Lots of people believed watching cartoons past a certain age was just not done. And I mean, when I was growing up, I had my small groups of other otaku friends, and we would all get into shenanigans, tape trade and manga trade, and in one case I manga traded with a friend and then ended up actually manga trading with her older sister through my friend for many years until I met that friend's sister in high school, and she's like, "Oh, you're the guy who lent my sister the FLCL volumes that I just took from her for 2 extra weeks. Thank you." That was very funny. I have vivid memories of meeting a friend of mine underneath a big old magnolia tree to tape trade, essentially. To tape trade and later on down the line, DVD trade anime with. And that was a wild portion of my fandom and my relationship to fandom and community and all that stuff. And I watched this just after watching Genshiken and just after having gone to an anime con kind of for a reason here. Because I talked about this a little bit in my con report video, which is the previous episode you can go check out. Either if you're watching this on YouTube, it's in the YouTube feed, or if you're listening to this, it is the previous episode in the podcast feed. But in that video, I talked about the sense of community and the sense of togetherness that comes from going to a convention. But I also talked about, and this clip has done really well on short form too, the loss of monoculture. There's a loss of that connecting factor. We all went to see the Harry Potter movie. We all went to see one weekend. That is much less common now. It is starting to be a little bit more common, but it's oftentimes divided up by like in groups you're in and all of this other stuff. But by and large, it's not there anymore. So when you find something that connects you to other people, it tends to have more value because that's much less common than it used to be. And a lot of what Otaku no Video explores the community of being into something like anime and manga and video games. And the kind of something to say about the difference between being a member of a community of weirdos and being a weirdo who's just kind of to the side. Throughout this, so this OVA is doing things that other OVAs just don't to this day. But it's using the form of being a thing that's not going to be on TV to have conversations that aren't readily had normally. And one of the ways it does that is it's got kind of tracks throughout the entirety of the 2 episodes. The first track is the story of Kubo and his kind of crime, Tanaka, as they go from being college kids who were in the same elementary school together and then went their separate ways, and then Kubo became a pretty normal athlete playing tennis kind of thing, and Tanaka became a full-blown otaku. Like, when the two find each other again after years, Tanaka is fully cosplaying as Char Aznable at the school festival, and Kubo's like, whoa. Gradually, Kubo finds himself drifting into the kind of people that Tanaka hangs out with, and gradually Kubo finds himself more and more enchanted with the world of anime and manga and video games, and he becomes, over time, a full-blown otaku. Like, fucking wears anime shirts, barely shaves, the kind of gross nerd, except anime. And you see the world's reaction to him, or you see his perceived reactions the world is taking to him. But the show makes sure that that's supported on some level, although it is absolutely fantastical. And this kind of weaving through also a fictionalized version of the storytelling of the founding of Studio Gainax, or Giant X, as they think they put it in the show. Starts with them all being college friends, and then them, like, both Tanaka and both Kubo and Tanaka trying to next step and become salary people. And then eventually they, Grand Prix goes the way it does, and then they found Gainax. But the other side of it is these little vignettes they call portraits of an otaku. And these are really always been really interesting to me because they are inherently accusatory. But if you read between the lines, the majority of the people who are otaku are in some way like their time or at the very edge of what's happening at that moment or in entertainment. These aren't people who are who are in like jobs that aren't really producing things. They are oftentimes, with the exception of one of them, who we'll get to in a second, oftentimes people who are like jobs that people care about them. I think in the first or second portrait of an otaku, they're straight up doing the interview while he's at work, and someone comes up and hands him documents. And it's like, can you give these a look over and sign off on them when you're done? So like, not just like a anime weirdo, or he tries to claim he's a former anime weirdo. He's like software engineer who's in charge of people, and that's a big deal. And a thing that's true now, that people have realized is true now, is that a lot of really successful people have that passion for other things. Like Cameron, famous ocean weirdo, who people happen to give a bunch of cameras and said, make them ocean movies. And he continues to do that. Turn Pocahontas into an ocean movie and then expand it into a whole weird world of ocean movies. And he's like, you got it. He, since the 90s, has been obsessed with Battle Angel Alita. If you've seen Alita Battle Angel, Robert Rodriguez, famously, I believe the Spy Kids movies, may have directed that, but he did it under the blessing and loose guidance of James Cameron. and like at the time they're anywhere together, they like look at each other, and someone's like, "Are you gonna make another one?" And James is like, "Do it." And Robert Rodriguez just kind of said like, "Sure, I would love to make another one, but you're the problem. You're the rights holder. You have to say it's okay." And then we get the band back together and we make another one. Famously took decades for that thing to get made. It came out and it did pretty well, mostly because all the otaku, including me, at the time said, "Go see this movie." This movie is a precious object and it must be protected at all costs. But the point is that throughout all these little vignettes, they're showing that otaku are already at, in many cases, where culture is going on some level. Technology-wise, and all of these different things. And also there's this other sense of like a bunch of weird perverts. And if you've my episode about reincarnation, which you're watching this on YouTube, you probably have, because there's a strong chance you have, because it's my most watched video currently. But I say in that, and this is a thing that's pretty true, is the concept, especially in anime, that weird perverts make great art. And what that has always actually meant to me is people who are manically passionate about things make great art because they have this attention to detail that is impossible from someone who's not that. So a perfect example of this is, if you've ever seen The Wind Rises from Hayao Miyazaki, or really any Hayao Miyazaki film, he's obsessive about details and about like in Spirited Away, when Chihiro puts her shoes on. The really well-known cut where Chihiro is putting her shoes on, and she does a little tap with her toe. That has since been carried forth into all of these different shows. Like, now characters do that. Before, they just weren't doing that. It was just like, oh, shoes on, we're going. And that carefulness, that, like, once again, for lack of a better term, attention to detail and focus, is something that you only have if it's real passion and it's like a product of your obsession made real. There's this great, and granted, this is from a man who says again and again and again, he claims he hates otaku. I think it was in the Kingdom of Dreams Madness when they did this, and there's a documentary crew is maniacal. Because they're definitely making and there's a couple of them at this point, they're definitely making a documentary about Studio Ghibli and its chief creator, Hayao Miyazaki, but they're broadening the lens just enough where they're showing the whole of him in a way that lots of more sycophantic attempts don't. And they have this scene where he's like, Otaku, and like, you don't get them, it's a mistake, the whole Miyazaki isms of it. And then a couple scenes later, they show him drawing airplanes. And the way this man draws and talks about, especially military airplanes, it is like a military otaku. He has that in him. He may not identify as that because he's a much close connection to that, because I believe his father or grandfather worked on planes in World War II or something. But he has this like Rolodex of knowledge that he's acting on constantly, and these things that he's passionate about that he pours into his film and his work. That's the exact same thing that happens for most otaku. As any of us can tell, any of the rest of us, we have stuff we're passionate about. But I think where he draws the line, and this line gets blurry in the show, but there's a particular character, the Portraits of Otaku, they straight up villainize for good reason. I'll get to that in a little bit. Where he clearly seems to draw a line, is he draws the line at a kind of that obsession, as a kind of dragon-like hoarding we all experience as anime fans and as otaku for seemingly no reason other than like dedication, love of the game. That seems to be not just not enough for him, but like actively somehow to the art form. And a part of me understands that, but also Old Man Screams at Cloud territory. Cranky anime grandpa will all miss him. If when he dies, it's not clear if he ever will. But there's some like immortal somehow to Miyazaki wildly. But the pivotal otaku throughout the film, throughout the 2 episodes of the OVA, show that kind of obsessive quality, but they also hint just a little at like that becoming something more. So one of the first times they do this is there's a character who is a I think an electrical engineer, or maybe just an engineer, and he's working on his job is working to make CDs and to like accurately precisely CDs and CD-ROMs and CDs. But there's this moment where he's like in the interview where he stops and he's like, I made these, and he holds up essentially like these plastic sunglasses with tons of like wiring and tech on them. And he puts them on and he says, I'm not kidding, he says, it reduces the mosaic effect on adult videos somewhat. Now, I don't know about you, but like if you ever see mosaic censoring, that's not a thing that's easy to like undo. I'm sure lots of AIs can do it now, but there was a time when, especially in the 90s when this thing was released, when that was not a thing people even thought about approaching or attempting to undermine. But this guy in his weird Gooner cave has like kit together essentially decensoring goggles. That's insane. That's a crazy thing. That is people really mean when they say weird perverts make the best art. It's less that like it's missing the kind of cart for the horse there in that phrase, because the phrase weird perverts is doing a lot of lifting in the phrase. What it actually says is people with enough raw passion for something, anything, could be anything. In the case of like Rory Rocks, seems to be for the one character's really all the female characters' bodies. That is also true in Jobless Reincarnation. But in the case of The Wind Rises, it's for planes. In the case of also The Boy and the Heron, it's also a little bit for planes for a while. But that kind of focused passion isn't something that's talked about a lot, and it's not something that a lot of people have the vocabulary to talk about outside of things like fetishization and, you know, all of this other stuff. But, and all the other, like, stuff goes along with it. But the difference is that when you apply the weird pervert thing to it, it becomes something that you no longer want to touch. If I just told you that, you know, was an audio-video engineer who specialized in, you know, bombs, and was also researching a way to reduce mosaic censorship, you'd have some questions about mosaic censorship considering the, like, context and stuff, but you would also be like, what? That's a big deal. That's a huge thing to try to accomplish. That's a thing that even now people can't revert very easily. But because the show gives him the connotation of being an otaku and gives all the otakus in the portraits of otakus this, like, tragic, first with the way the interviews are conducted and what they're asking, and then immediately after with these, like, charts and graphs that, like, show they're real weirdos in terms of the broader amount of society, you'd be given a completely of, like, this guy had produced something that is a achievement. And many of the, like, portraits of otakus have guys, all of them are guys too, have these guys, and they have done something that is technically impressive, but to an end that no one except for them and their weirdo friends care about. There's another guy who has just amassed a unbelievable collection of videotapes. I mean, wall and beyond collection of videotapes. And to such a degree that the narrator at the end of the interview, and then he left for America to find the ultimate videotape collection and try and continue to build it himself. It's wild. But he has so much more than anybody ever needs. He's essentially sitting in the middle of an archive that could be incredibly valuable to somebody at some point. But because you see him as an absolute freak show. And that's absolutely on purpose, because what it's trying to do is it's trying to make you feel the way people felt about otakus and like the stan culture, the kind of stan level fandom for anime that people had at the time. And then they flip back to the, like, long tale of Kubo and Tanaka and the ultimate founding of Gainax. And really the only times when you get that ping of that feeling of what you're seeing in the portraits of an otaku is when Kubo specifically has to interact with someone who's not like one of them, who's not a fellow otaku. Namely the character who's, like, she's not a love interest, but she is the, like, objective of for much of the show. His name is, I think, no, that's not him. She is, like, high senior who's going to the same college as he is. She's also in the tennis program. And the show is pretty good, being like, if he continued down the tennis program path, like, that he was on, they would end up together. But he strays from that path. He becomes a full-blown otaku. She doesn't take the time to she really notice, other than he doesn't seem to be taking care of himself or, like, keeping his studies or any of that stuff. And so she goes off and finds another guy. But the thing that the show's pretty careful to show you is that they were always good friends, but he never made any advances. He never, like, they meet up at to a point in the show. I think they end inside of the first episode. Kubo and Ueno meet every once in a while at this cafe. And they like, have fun drinks and talk. But that's the most really that you see them together in a real concentrated way, especially after a while. And there seems to be something unrequited on both levels. And Ueno isn't blind to this. She sees it, and they that she sees it later, but neither of them quite act on whatever lover thing they got going on. It's never confirmed that they're like a couple. I don't think they ever go out on a date together. But eventually, track of her because he loses track of his life because he's become a full-blown otaku, and he's like so on manga and garage kits and all this other stuff that he just kind of focuses in and like hyper on it, and everything else falls away. And then that's a hard thing for the show. The show doesn't super deal with, or the OVA doesn't super deal with, because it's saying this is how it happens. It's saying, and this is true oftentimes, that people are so focused that are so focused like they can help it. That's actually a great line Genshiken, and I talked about it in the Genshiken episode. Saki points out to Sasahara's little sister, you have a chance with you don't have it. Not only do you not have a chance with I forgot the character name, the blonde one, with I think his name is Itsuki or something, with boyfriend, but you don't have a chance with any of them because they can't help it. They naturally obsessed with this. To love them is to love all of them and love their obsession. And Saki she just put up, but not totally, because she loves her boyfriend. She loves him, and to say that she doesn't love his obsession with video games, and specifically fighting games, would be to say that she doesn't love him. So there's always this sense in a relationship that you can fix someone else, and that someone else needs fixing, or you can curb off of this, that, or the other thing. And a great thing, Goodwill Hunting, that Robin says to Matt Damon, you got a whole person, they all, that's part of it. And yes, you have to be honest about those warts and almost not care, because if you don't, you're in love with a fantasy of that person. And Ueno essentially didn't reach out. She didn't try. And yes, it's the 90s, and it's harder to, pick up her phone and be like, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. You good? But that shouldn't matter. She could have gone over to his apartment. She has all the tools she needs to, reach out and be like, hey, are you okay? What have you gotten yourself into? Where are you at? And realize that, the guy she was friends with, maybe even cared about a little bit more than just a friend, is still in there. He's not just because you are an otaku doesn't mean that you're not something, that you're not the person you were. It means that you've tacked something on. And very often otaku, comic books, can't help it. We love stuff. It's our love for the medium of anime and its surrounding parts is in some sense core to a person after they've loved it for long enough. And that's not just anime. That's, your love, your hobbies, all of it. If you love animals for long enough, you are no longer a horse girl. You're just a person who really appreciates animals. But that's not a thing that's encouraged at the hobby level, if that makes any sense. And what claims to do is not, and this show is of the word Otaking in the fandom. If you've ever heard that word and you're like, who came up with Otaking? It came from the show. It means to be an otaku of otakus. Kubo's ultimate goal after he is unwittingly quasi-dumped by Ueno by, calling her to check in on her when she never called him to check in on him, and another guy answers the phone, and he hears over the phone her hemming and hawing like, oh no, what should I do? And then the guy gets her off the hook and hangs up on him, which is like immensely cruel. That guy, but also of her for not like being like, for not even subjecting herself to like the awkwardness, like, I know we're dating, but we're close, and you just caught me in a compromising scenario with a dude. I like that. After that happens, him and her trying to like become real and find jobs, and he just like, fuck this shit. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a proper member of society. Society clearly isn't serving me. And by the way, interesting part of the portraits of otaku that I talked about earlier that's been happening this entire time is they'll show you like a portrait of an otaku, and then that like little segment be related somehow to the portion of the story that it's like set next. And what he's basically saying is like, I don't want to be a guy who is disconnected from the thing I love because the world said I had to be an adult. And they end up starting this company called, that I mentioned before, called Grand Prix, which is a company that makes garage kits. And the show is like half joking, serious with its entire story and its timeline, obviously. But from that point on, he's involved with what he loves. Like, not only a fan level, but at a high level, producing things that go out into the world. And his relationship changes. And the whole thing eventually becomes about him professionalizing his love of anime and manga and video games and all this other stuff, and building a life for himself and surrounding himself with people and not being alone. And the thing that you see, once again, with all the portraits of an otaku, with the exception of one, who once again we'll get to in a second, with all the other otakus from the portraits of the otaku, is that they are all astoundingly alone. Like, heartbreakingly alone. No prospects of not being alone. And I'm not even talking, like, the directors focus on their lack of a girlfriend or the fact that they haven't had sex or all those things like that would deride them as losers, but are also part of another party's interest in them, and they are clearly not putting themselves out there and all the 900 things. But all of these guys are, you're seeing, like, incredibly solitary. Most painful one for me is, I think in the second episode, they focus, and this is a really interesting thing that they do specifically with the portraits of otaku, is they kind of, probably not as knowingly as I think they realize, telegraph the future of the anime industry through these portraits. You know, you have a guy who is essentially running an illegal tape ring, and that in some way predicts that eventually everybody's gonna like get their aim not legally and the industry's gonna crash. You have, you know, a guy who is in love with from a computer game. That sounds an awful lot like Annie to me. And then there's this one who is a guy from America. So he's like an American-born otaku who is a missionary and who is so singularly obsessed with Japan that he's depressed that he couldn't have been born into what he refers to as this golden country with all of its supremely awesome culture. Now, I deeply love Japan more than most people, but I'm not wearing rose-colored glasses about it. I'm not wearing rose-colored glasses about any country, including America. You know, there are still people who think like that, who want that. When I went to Osaka, hi Kie, said, hey, don't stay in the shitty hostels in Osaka. They all have bed bugs. And I was like, why would I stay in a shitty hostel? I'm going on vacation. I have money. I'm not going to vacation like I'm poor. I can avoid it. And she's like, I don't know. What kind of thing you wanted to do here. I don't know if you wanted to feel like you were getting the authentic experience. And I looked her straight in the eye and I was like, look, nerd. But I also am fully aware I will never be Japanese. It will just never happen. It's just not gonna happen, dog. So I'm not gonna try. Like, I'm not gonna, like, go get an Airbnb and slum it, or go get an Airbnb and take a rental potentially away from somebody who needs it. I'm gonna go to a hotel. That's what you do when you're on vacation in another country. If you use it. Which, if you're thinking about planning a trip to Japan, I highly suggest that you do not get an Airbnb. The laws about what's livable there are buried, and you are perhaps not ready for what they consider livable. Portia of it predicts the kind of widespread anime beyond the borders of America, and it's beyond the borders of Japan, and it explicitly talks about, like, how it will affect, relationships between Japan and America. And in that moment, it's just kind of like, hi, stares cool Japan straight in the face. But the last otaku that I want to talk about is this one revolving around, I forget the guy's pseudonym, who is something called a cell thief. And if you know anything about film production or about animation production, especially in the early years of animation and in the early years of film, deeply incredible films have questionable source material because no one cares. Because no one was paying attention. So, like, an extra walked away with, like, a real Wizard of Oz or something. Who actively, famously, the actual film, not the Osamu Tezuka, which is very good and fun, but, like, based off of a poster he saw one time when he was walking down the street, I'm not kidding, of Metropolis, was for many years lost to time. Like, people knew sections of it, and there were ways you could watch most of it, but nobody had any whole print of the thing because it was just lost. Nobody knew what happened to it. It's like somebody found print of it in Paris, I think, in, like, somebody's garage. Something insane happened that much longer time than you think. But in terms of a pop cultural thing, like anime, like things that are being produced in the time in which they are popular, there's another thing that can happen, and that is people stealing and or selling the production materials. And the Portrait of Otaku guy who is a cell thief is just rightfully portrayed as a villain. And what he essentially does is he areas where all the animation studios are, and he just kind of wanders because at that time, and still to this day, animation studios use tons of outside labor and outside help and contractors. So if you walk in confidently enough, they won't question it. And then you take what you want and you leave. And, like, he said he had a code, but even the, like, documentarian help, that code sounds shaky at best. And this whole... And once they show you that, they show you, I think, Tanaka and Kubo and their friends online to see. And a guy walks by with character design sheets, like, official character sheets of, like, Captain Harlock. I'm like, something wild. Something, like, deeply recognizable and wild. And it's just this random dude. He just has them. And they're all like, ooh, ah, ooh, ah, ooh, ah. You, having seen that Portrait of an Otaku thing, you're like, what? How do these, dog? And kind of, that's the portion of the Portraits of an Otaku that they're doing where they're really telling you, this guy's a bad dude. This guy's unredeemable. And they say, not all otaku are just. And what they're doing there is they're suggesting that the rest of the ones they show you are just. They may be, quote, perverts, but they have a kind of, like, to them that this guy, and, like, feels slimy for the entire time, And once again, the documentarian is not doing much to push you in either direction on this one. It's one of the only ones he doesn't do that, where the footage and the question asking doesn't do that. He does it just fine on his own. And that just like, it shows this predatory nature towards these people who are earnest fans of the medium and are like hobbyists. They're doing it once again for the love of the game. And they're showing like the world will take advantage of this. And you see that now all the time in, gacha like Gunner games, like, for example, that was just an Anime NYC that had a major controversy why it was happening. Also had to simultaneously deal with. That game is about collecting waifus. But it's got mechanics and stuff, but it's about collecting waifus. Their big was take a picture with these hot cosplayers, and here's this raffle style saying where you try and draw a 5-star, and if you don't, you get stickers. If you do, you get, I forget what you got if you did, but like they were to the character design and then ingratiating you to the mechanics of spending money, and that's what that's what Musume is about. That's what, all the gacha games you can name are, you look at this hot girl, wouldn't you like to own her? She's got a 0.00001% drop rate. Spend money, it happens. And by then we'll have invented other cute girls for you to attempt to own with worse drop rates, or Pokemon cards. Like anime, like a lot of other stuff, started with attachment to consumerism. Gundam was made to sell plastic models. Not much bigger than that and much more than that. Even anime are oftentimes fancy manga release or fancy commercials for their later Blu-ray release. And when it's at that very high level, you have it being filtered through artists and artistry. But then you also have people like cell thieves who know that, like, Otaku can't help themselves, but like the stuff salivate over this. I actively watch things that I think, as a consumer of media, look at things and think, oh, that looks like they spent a lot of money on it. I'm gonna watch that one because it looks pretty. I say that all the time. One of my favorite things about the premiere of Sentenced to Be a Hero at and I talked about this in the the post for the second day. I think the post for the third day for Anime NYC, but the 45-minute premiere episode of Sentenced to Be a Hero is unstoppably gorgeous. It is beautiful. They animated the fuck out of it. It's incredible. I would love to see the production drawings for that. But also, me being me and having seen Otaku no Video and like knowing how the world works, if someone just up and was like, here, the production draw, I'd be like, these are cool as hell. Where did you get these? How do you have them? Why? And like I said earlier, the Cell Thief guy is the only character, the only one of the portrait of an otaku things, and there's another that they actually run down in the streets who don't do anything to, but he comes off as being the villain of like the universe. I just think that this show made by people who love this stuff about other people who love this stuff, aka anime and once again anime and the surrounding and the like four corners of hip hop of anime, which don't know about the four disciplines of hip hop. I think it's beatboxing, rapping, graffiti, what other one? Oh, and breaking. Like those are considered to be the four hip hop. If you wanted those for otakudom, you would have anime, video games, light novels, manga, probably. Like the thing that is unique about Studio Gainax, and the thing that Otaku no Video really proves out, and even if it's an absolutely fantastical version of the founding of Gainax, is that for the most part, is that Gainax was a moment where the people who grew up loving all of this different media and things like Star Wars, things like military hardware, things like, all the like visual novel games and all like porn, all of this other stuff. The moment when those people, for the first, probably not the complete first time, but for one of the first times, consumer class to being the creator class, and did it for the love of the game. And later on down the line, the stuff that happened with Gainax happened. Gainax kind of became a license hole that fell apart until very recently. Gainax still really licenses. The reason why new panty and stocking is happening, the reason why I could do the interview I talked about in the opening, is because Gainax let go of the license because it is slowly dissolving over time. Because they did a lot of financial chicanery that caused a huge shakeup that is the reason Studio Trigger exists. That the license for panty and stocking reverted to the original creator, aka Imaishi, Wakabayashi, and crew. And the show even really fact that like these guys are business moguls. They are otaku of otaku. They love the things they're doing. They're producing. Even in the founding of in the moment when they found Gainax, I think they call it X, but Gainax for short. They, both Kubo and Tanaka, look at each other like, we have this great idea, but neither of us can fucking draw. And that's when they bring in Fukuhara from the old company, and they produce the like short animation starring Misty May. And they then sell alongside, figures and all this stuff ultimately going. This is a common thing now. If you look at Steven Universe. Steven Universe does not exist without without Sailor Moon. You look at, there was a really like Rebecca Sugar who is responsible for Steven Universe. Rebecca Sugar-esque show that was an original show that was like mind-bogglingly insane from a couple of years back. High Guardian Spice. This thing's insane. But it was greenlit because it had all of the like trappings of a magical girl show. And a good and interesting one. It was so weird. The scene in it where this mildly psychotic girl tells this like one-liner joke about banging the boys that comes out of nowhere. Like no one before or after that did anything about that. No one acknowledged it. It wasn't like it was like a suggested thing, and she's beating the lot of something else with like a big old spiked ball baton, and you're like, what happened? What happened? Who let through? Those shows, and a lot of shows right now in like modern American parlance, are deeply influenced by the that came before, including anime, including manga. People putting all sorts of things, lots of other things. Notoriously, The Matrix is the Wachowskis' like secret psyop into getting people to watch Ghost in the Shell, and also apparently getting the right to be able to spend all their ability points for the industry and make fucking Speed Racer live action, which is a great movie. I've also talked about it on this YouTube channel and on the podcast, so you can go check that out. But this show is about that. It's about the cultural consumers becoming the cultural producers. And not in the way that like I or any other influencer is doing it. We're talking about the thing. In the way that they are taking the inspiration they bebop from watching Gurren Lagann, from watching, all these other things, and filtering it through new thing in a real way and into their own ideas. And that's why things like Evangelion feel so revolutionary, because Evangelion is playing with all of these archetypes that came before it and like sharpening them to a fine point and doing things with them. It's one of the reasons why a show like Yu Yu Hakusho is incredible. You have a master sitting down with the classic shonen form and being like, A, what if I did this better than anybody ever could? And B, what if I messed with it a whole lot? What if I took a character archetype from my wife who's made Sailor Moon and stuck my show a side character and explored that a little. Explored what it really looks like to be like a grown-up shoujo girl. And that's a really cool thing. I think that that's important because Otaku no Video kind of is what we all were starting to suspect with people like Michael B. Jordan, who is a devout nerd, is that people who produce culture also consume it. Is also changing how they think and what they do and how they interact. To bring it back to my fancy with Wakabayashi and Imaishi, new panty and garter belt, a lot of what they're doing with panty and stocking with garter belt, they have an episode that is just about playing fucking Magic the Gathering. They have an episode and like a whole situation from The Fast and the Fut with jizz. I'm not kidding. I did not stutter if you haven't been watching it, but you probably should. It's over on Prime. But a lot of what people get out of things like Studio Trigger and the reason why people love their work, the reason why people love the stuff from Gainax when got in their shambling husk, is that it felt like the watch movies where like the level of homage was still surface enough, really like saw it in a way that's not true. If you have to know a lot, that kind of samurai western qualities out of the Star Wars universe, even more so now that it's been like spun out beyond George Lucas. But in the Star Wars, if you had seen enough samurai movies and if you had western movies, you could identify, the fact that Jedi were samurai wandering west. Darth Vader is a samurai warlord, essentially. That stuff is there, but in the case they were still producing constantly, and now Trigger, they make it very clear. They reward you for having an understanding of culture outside of them. They want to because they love that stuff. You don't spend the amount of time to make sperm-based Vin Diesel without kind of loving Vin Diesel a little bit. Even if he's dead. But I know that's why I think I'm going to leave it. If you like the show, new episodes drop every Thursday on both YouTube and on your podcast app of choice. If you want to get more from me, I encourage you to go over to bento-box.ghost.io. I'm going to put up a QR code here probably, and also see the site right about now probably on the back screen behind me. But have every place you can find me at the bottom of every page, and articles and podcasts and videos and that mentioned with Wakabayashi and Imaishi. So definitely go check all that out. You can find the direct link in the description of the YouTube channel or in any episode description. So until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio. I'll talk to you later.